Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And I'm here today to teach you just a few simple and basic hand sewing stitches. So for those of you who do not have a sewing machine, or maybe you do have one and you've never really learned how to use it, or you do have one and it breaks down on you and you got to resort to hand sewing, or even you're out somewhere and you step on your skirt and it rips and you're smart enough to keep a sewing kit with you. Just some different stitches you can use to repair that while you're out on the road or whatever's going on. So just a little history real quick is that I have, though I do a lot of videos showing we're using the treadle machine for sewing different things, and I have a playlist I'll be putting in the description box down below, I do forget the importance of teaching people how to hand sew. It is very important. No matter how skilled you are with a sewing machine, you do need to know how to at least do some basic stitches. So if you're new, I used to teach mostly ballet, but dance classes, and every year we did at least one big performance, and I made most of the costumes. Well, one year when I was in the middle of doing a whole bunch of costumes, right in the middle of it, or at least I still had another 24 costumes to go. And my sewing machine just wouldn't work anymore. It just quit. So I ended up having to resort to hand stitching all those because I did not have the money or the time to have to run out and try to find another sewing machine, and I didn't want to bother with it. I just wanted to get the costumes done. And I was actually surprised once I dedicated myself to doing that, how fast the job actually went. And the nice thing about hand sewing is you can do it wherever you are. You can do it in the evening while you're listening to some kind of podcast or watching something on YouTube or a movie or whatever it is. It's actually a pretty relaxing task to do. And I surprised myself at how much I could get done. So one of the costumes I made was the little Russian costumes, and they were all a stretch knit. So for those I use a different kind of stitch than I would do with a fabric like this. It's just a cotton. So if I was going to make a patchwork skirt or any style of skirt out of cotton like this, the stitching I'm going to use on that is going to be different than how I'm going to use on a stretch knit. So that's why I want to cover the three basic stitches that I would use and that I think you should learn. And we're not going to get into decorative stitches and stuff, and I don't really do that kind of thing because I'm just not interested. But there are other YouTube channels out there that have a lot of great videos on doing decorative stitches, embroidery, and so on and so forth. But that's not what this is about. This is just being able to repair things or even make clothes for yourself or your family, and that's something you can do by hand with the fabrics you have on hand. So let's start with a nice long piece of thread here. Sometimes I usually go too long, and then, the problem with that is then you got a lot of extra thread you got to work with. All right, well, I grabbed a little bit fatter needle than what's really needed because I'm hoping I'll make it easier to see. And it's got a nice big hole in it too. It makes it easy to thread this way. But even though I can do that, thread it through that hole without my glasses and without the needle threader, I still want to demonstrate the needle threader because this can make it easier if you got really tiny, if you're using a real skinny needle with small holes, and you can pick up a needle threader for real cheap. So you just poke it through your needle hole like that, or the eye, and then put your thread through that metal wire and then pull it through like that. And that can make it a lot easier for threading. And then the reason I pull off a nice long piece at a time is so I can double it over. I never do any hand stitching without doubling my thread over, and then I just tie a regular knot. And then a lot of times when I'm starting a project, it depends on what it is I'm doing exactly, because watch, this thread, this knot can pull right through there. So just to prevent that from happening, I pull it gently until the knot stops, and then I'll thread the needle back through real close to that, and then tie a knot in that. That will just really make it secure. And then I'll do something similar at the end of the project. Okay, so now let me just bring that needle back to the other side. And let's go over some of these basic stitches. So the running stitch is the one I would use, let's say if I'm making a patchwork skirt or even just a solid skirt, but I've got tiers and I'm sewing the tiers together. This is a stitch you can use for quilting or for something like that. And this is how I do hand quilting. And this is actually a little easier with a skinnier and longer needle than what I've got here. But I'm hoping this will make it more visible. So you see how I just kind of back and forth little, and the shorter the stitch, the closer they are together, the stronger this is going to hold. And then carefully pull that through, make sure your thread isn't all bunched up. Sometimes you can even just take your finger and hold it like that if you got a real long piece. You don't want it to get knotted as you pull it through. And not perfectly straight, but I am just trying to demonstrate here. So just rocking it back and forth, trying to keep your stitches somewhat even. And you can go closer together than that, or if you're wanting to do it as a basting stitch, you can make them very long, like this. Very, very long, if you're just trying to baste something together. And instead of pin it, then you can do your stitches like that. Okay, so not the best example because it's so crooked. Okay, so let's go ahead and do the whip stitch now. The whip stitch is one that I'm going to use on anything that's stretchy. And so it's a pretty fast working stitch. So again, you can start off the same way like I showed earlier. You can use this stitch on any fabric, but especially on something that's stretchy, because the whip stitch is going to allow for stretch, just like your zigzag stitch is going to allow for stretch, you know, the zigzag stitch on your sewing machine. So anyway, just come in from the back. It's kind of similar to the blanket stitch, but it's going to go a little bit quicker, and you don't need it as to look fancy. It's just to be able to stitch the fabric together to give it the stretch it needs. I probably should have grabbed some t-shirt material and so that I could demonstrate, but by having the stitch like that, that'll make it so that when you have to stretch it, like to pull it over a head or whatever, it'll be able to actually stretch. Okay, then the other stitch, the third one, this is going to be when you need something to be far more secure. So you're going to start off with a regular stitch like this. Then you're going to come back, it's called a back stitch, because you're going to come back and go about at the halfway point through that first stitch. If I can get my needle to line up properly, around in there like that, and then you're going to make the same length stitch. So the stitch is can be a little bit longer, but because you're using that back stitch, that is what's going to make it nice and strong. So this is a stitch people might like to use in putting in zippers and so on. So again, I came up at the halfway point through that last stitch, and then I'm making about as long. So I'm going to go the rest of this length of this stitch plus another half to extend it past that. And then what happens is once I get to that point where I've got at least one of those stitches completed, you're going to come up right about where the end of the previous stitch was. So this is this stitch really is going to lock things in, and then it makes it look more solid too. So again, this is more for if you need it really strong. And you can do them shorter stitches than that if you prefer. So you've got your back stitch, your whip stitch, and then I took out the running stitches so I could reuse this thread again. And those are the three basic ones that I use for hand stitching. In fact, that's all I use when I'm hand stitching, are those three stitches. And with those three stitches, you can make anything you need to make. You can use that to make t-shirts, anything stretchy. You can use that for making shirts like this, pants, because all those Russian outfits, I was doing the shirts and the pants. Actually, maybe I already had the shirts done. I think it was all the pants I had to make. And I stitched all those pants together by hand for those little guys. And there was a couple other costumes I had to do like that, all by hand. And one of them was a stretchy, it was sewing some fabric onto a stretchy waistband. And so being able to do that whip stitch all the way through there to give it that stretch was really, really important. So you can put anything together that way. And it's just as 3 basic stitches, and anyone can do this. It can take practice. As you can see, I don't do a whole lot of hand stitching anymore because I love my sewing machine. But when you have to, the more you do it, the more practice you get. You find out easier ways to hold the fabric, and you just get smoother at it. But the basics of being able to stitch things together is really a piece of cake. And some of the people that made, I think there was one of the skirts in that last collaboration that somebody stitched together all by hand. I can't remember which one it was. But I know there's some of my followers using my sewing videos, instead of using a machine, just use the basic pattern and then sewed it together by hand, much like I showed you here. So anyway, I just wanted to get the basics out there because, again, anyone can do this. Just these basic skills right here are really important for us to know so that we can repair things or make things as needed, especially if we can't afford to run out and buy a sewing machine, just like what happened to me in the middle of making all those costumes that year. Anyway, I hope you found this video helpful, and don't forget to check out my sewing playlist if you want more about how a treadle machine, how to use one, or even just some basic patterns. Even if you don't use a machine and you do it by hand, you've got the patterns out there and some and how to put things together. And if you got any tips you would like to throw out there, because like I said, I know this is pretty unskilled looking because I just don't do this that often anymore, though I do sometimes still hem pants by hand. That happens once in a while if they need to be nice slacks, like last year for my son's pants, you know, when he got married. And I think I have a video on that. So it's basically, by the way, that's basically just the running stitch, but you just make your stitch on the front side of the fabric really, really tiny. You just barely grab a hold of it because you don't want it to show. Anyway, so yes, any tips you would like to offer down below, please put them down there and let us know. If you've made anything by hand yourself, made a whole outfit, a skirt, a top, whatever it is, share with us down below and your experiences and what did you think about that. Like I said, I find it very relaxing and kind of enjoyable if I'm not in a hurry to get it done. It doesn't take as long as you think, though. Once you kind of find your groove and you get that muscle memory going, it actually goes pretty quickly. I was surprised when I was making those costumes how quickly I got them done. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.